Welcome back to the Sharp End Podcast, a podcast aimed at minimizing future outdoor accidents by way of storytelling. Real people sharing real stories. I'm Ashley, the creator and producer of the show. This show is brought to you by Rocky Talkie, a backcountry radio company based in Denver, Colorado. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while now, you know that I love my mountain radios. October marks Rocky Talkie's 5th year anniversary. Be sure to sign up for their emails and be the first to know about their anniversary celebration. They'll be giving away radios, so head on over to rockytalkie.com and subscribe by entering your email address at the bottom of their homepage. Don't forget that Sharp End listeners get 10% off by going to rockytalkie.com/sharpend. I would never go into the backcountry without advice to assist in an emergency. That's why I partnered with Zoleo. Zoleo is a two-way messaging device that uses the Iridium satellite network for reliable coverage across the globe. You can clip this small device to your pack with the carabiner for easy access. It has location sharing and tracking features that are not yet offered by iPhones or any other cell phone. Zoleo also offers weather forecasts, medical assistance, and has an epic battery life. We recently used this device on our fall moose hunt in Alaska and were extremely impressed with it. Don't find yourself in a situation where you don't have an emergency tether. Get yourself a Zoleo and use code SHARPEND to waive the activation fee. For those who crave adventure as part of their lifestyle but don't let it define them, meet the Amazfit T-Rex 3, the ultimate ready-for-anything adventure watch. Whether you're hitting the trails, tearing down a mountain on your bike, or saying yes to that spontaneous night skiing invite, the Amaze3 T-Rex 3 is ready for it all. It's more than just a smartwatch. It's your personal guide to exploration, discovery, and the thrill of the unknown. Stay on top of your health with advanced monitoring and experience the convenience of a cutting-edge AI personal assistant, complete with a built-in speaker to keep you connected and informed every step of the way. Adventure is calling, and it's time to answer with the Amazfit T-Rex 3. Head to us.amazfit.com/sharpend for 15% off. Tanner and Parker were swept down Mount Shasta after triggering a wind slab a few months ago. After a 12-hour ground rescue, they were finally off the mountain, but did sustain physical and mental injuries from the traumatic event. Tune into this episode to hear their story. I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, my name is Parker. I live in Southern Oregon, in the town of Ashland, and I am a builder for work. But my favorite, the thing that I'm obsessed with is going up and down hills, climbing mountains, skiing. It's my biggest passion and what kind of brings me balance in the insanity of life. And I'm stoked to be here. A big fan of the show. I've been listening for a while and always kind of like, would listen and be like, hopefully I never end up on the show, but here we are. So,
yeah, my name's Tanner Schaefer. I live just over the Oregon border in Northern California from Parker, and he's one of my main backcountry buddies. We do a lot of adventures together. I'm just a total ski bum. I work seasonal jobs, a lot of stuff on fires, and also construction with Parker in his shop. But so I think we're here today to talk about an accident that happened to us back at the end of April 27th. And I kind of think the best way to set it up is really to talk about this whole trip that we had planned, a few years back to bike and ski through the entire Cascade Range. And so this accident happened on the right in the the first week of our trip. Yeah, so we had planned, me and Parker were climbing a few years ago. We just kind of had this idea of how cool would it be to do an unsupported bike tour of the Cascade Range and try and climb and ski all the mountains in between. Parker has some experience with bike touring, and I'm really into cycling, so it seemed totally natural to kind of do this this big adventure, and we kind of finally lined up the weather window and the time where we both had enough time available to make it happen.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah, it was we just were both, I mean, because we wanted to do it the year before and it didn't work out, and we were just so excited for this trip. And honestly, like being on the trip, like can't remember being happier.
Oh, cool.
It was just going so well. We were so pumped, and it was just like amazing.
We had set aside 2 months to do it, and we started it off on Mount Lassen. We were trying to get every Cascade volcano over 9,000 feet. So we're planning on ending up in Baker after a couple months of bike touring. And our first Mountain Lassen, we just went and tagged it afternoon, like sunset ski, just super, super great conditions.
Wow.
And then we rallied up to Shasta in just like 2 days. We did like an 85-mile day on the bikes, and
wow.
We were drafting each other, and everything was going super well. It was super, super fun. We were, our bikes were all loaded down with like probably 40 pounds of gear. And the camping and, everything was going really well.
And food too, right? Because you must have been carrying all your food, right?
Yeah, we had all our, we were eating out as much as we could. That was kind of the plan to, just eat in restaurants. And, but there's areas in between where we're obviously going to be unsupported and having to camp. We actually got a ticket in Lassen for not having our food in a bear canister. The park ranger came in past the gate and wrote us a ticket. I think he was pretty bored since there wasn't much traffic in the park yet, since most stuff was closed. But so we made it to Shasta, and if any of you are familiar with the mountain, it has a satellite cone, Shastina, which is actually still one of the biggest mountains in the Cascades. So we definitely had that included on our list. When we got there, the weather was kind of funky, some of those kind of spring storms where it'll spit a little bit of snow, but then get sunny and melt, and the visibility was kind of in and out. But because of that, we decided to do Shastina first, and all that went really smooth. We got the little visibility window that we were looking for. Had a great day on Shastina with another friend joined us out there.
Our buddy Pete came and joined us too.
Yeah, had a super, super fun day up there, and our spirits were high. It was just looking like really great. We came back into town, and we're looking at the forecast for our next weather window. We were going to take a rest day and then try and hit Shasta the next day, but the forecast was just kind of iffy. It was like the visibility was the main concern. It looked like there was going to be a tiny bit of fresh snow, but really the visibility was going to be our biggest problem in summiting. Which, Shasta is a mountain that we've each summited. I think I've got almost 20 summits of Shasta, and Parker's a guide on Shasta, and has summited countless times. So it's a mountain we're really comfortable with, and one that we've both summited in whiteouts and been up there in pretty hairy conditions. So we definitely felt like we were in a good place to, even if we didn't get great skiing conditions, that we were going to get it done and kind of carry on with our trip. I think we talked about that. Even if we have to summit in a whiteout and ski ice the whole way down, like we were going to do it. It was just kind of this inevitability that we were going to make it happen, even if the conditions weren't great.
Unstoppable.
Which is not our normal mindset. Like normally, like we're trying to have fun, we're trying to ski, but this was very like goal oriented. We're like, we're not normally the blind summiters, but we were going in blind. We're like, we're doing it unless we're like Tanner said, like unless we're getting totally like blown over, like pretty much no matter what, unless it like really doesn't feel safe. But yeah, obviously that didn't play out for us very well.
And did you have that goal, like that goal mentality, because like you were on a time crunch, like you had, it was, Shasta was within this like longer expedition. So you kind of like just, you didn't want to, you already took a rest day. You didn't want to take any additional rest days. So that's kind of why you had this goal.
Exactly. It was like, we need to get going on the trip. We had already burned an extra day in Shasta, and like, we've got quite a few, we wanted to be done by like end of June, early July. So we were trying to get on the road. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we ended up taking 2 rest days in Shasta because the weather just looked bad. Just like it didn't look like much visibility. Then on that second rest day, we pedaled up to the trailhead because we'd been staying in town, and camped up at the trailhead at the Bunny Flat trailhead, which is kind of the standard Avalanche Gulch route that everybody goes up. Yeah, the weather for the next day, I remember the forecasts were were really saying that it was going to kind of shut down around midday, that there was going to be kind of some storms coming in, and that we're probably going to lose Viz up there midday at some point. And, we kind of knew this wasn't ideal, but we just weren't prepared to stay another day up there, so we went for it. We woke up at, I think we woke up at 5, left the trailhead at around 6 and started climbing. We weren't moving super fast. It was pretty blustery. Parker was having some problems with his feet and blisters and stuff, kind of his nemesis. But we were making good time, and we were on pace for a summit. It was all going to plan. Despite the conditions not being perfect. But we had good visibility. The wind was blowing, and I don't think we really saw any fresh snow until we got to maybe 10,000 feet. Is that about right, Parker?
I think under the Red Banks, maybe there was a little bit before, but under the Red Banks is where it really kind of was piled up. I mean, I felt like it was pretty firm going up, even around Oberon's, or Oberman's. Oberman's. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember there was a little bit of fresh snow kind of blowing around the surface, maybe above Helen Lake at 10,000, which is, one of the prominent kind of stops on the mountain. But really, really not much. And the wind was blowing hard. We could definitely see that there was wind transport up higher. And kind of our main focus, I think, was just...
Yeah, it was the kind of thing where you're stopping and putting your head down.
Bummer.
Yeah, I mean, Shasta's a notoriously windy mountain. It's a super prominent peak, and
well, it's high.
It's high elevation, and there's really nothing else around it. Yeah, it's high, and there's nothing else around it to kind of shelter the wind. So it really,
right,
kind of classic high Cascade volcano that just gets kind of hammered by the winds.
Pretty average wind.
Yeah, nothing extreme, but windy for sure. So yeah, we're making our way up. We skinned most of the way to maybe 10K, and then switched to crampons because it's spring conditions with good cramponing surface, and we started ascending the normal kind of Avalanche Gulch route towards Thumb Rock, which is it's kind of the standard route. There's this really prominent feature on the mountain that I think we're going to probably talk about a lot called the Red Banks, which is kind of this sloping band of cliffs and chutes that's right at the top of Avalanche Gulch. It tops out at about 13,000 feet. And the normal route ascends kind of up to the right of the Red Banks and then goes over the top of them, towards the summit plateau and kind of the upper part of the mountain. And that's where we would typically go. It's just, the least kind of exposed to rockfall and, most of the other hazards on the mountain typically. But that day we were just getting blown around a lot. We were really just doing our best to stay out of the wind was kind of our main concern. So when we kind of made the decision to go to the right in the standard route above the Red Banks, or the other way you can go is to the left of the Red Banks, which climbs underneath the Red Banks and kind of straight up the top of this big bowl that Avalanche Gulch is. I think I was the one that sort of pitched hey, I think it's going to be less windy if we go left of the Red Banks and just kind of go straight up Avalanche Gulch into the bowl. Is that right, Parker?
I would say so. Yeah. Yeah. We skinned till it kind of didn't make sense. I guess when we stopped skinning is where it really kind of was firm, right? But there was I remember there was some bands of snow coming up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you're on it. Yeah.
And up until this point, there's just a dusting of fresh snow. We were hoping for more snow, because we were trying to get good conditions. And
yeah, always.
We knew it wasn't going to soften up and be good corn skiing, so we were hoping for little pockets of fresh snow. And at this point we're getting close to we're probably between 11 and 12,000 feet, and we're pretty pessimistic about the conditions. We're thinking maybe there's a little pocket of fresh deposited snow on one of these southeast aspects that we were looking to ride, but really we thought it was just going to be kind of dust on crust. So we carried on our climb, and so we're ascending to the left underneath the Red Banks, and still in good, like crunchy cramponing snow. We're making good progress. We're maybe a little slower than usual because of the wind. We're still getting blown around a little bit. Around 12,500 feet, we're kind of tucked under this cliff band, and we started hitting some fresh deposited snow, and our crampon track turned into a boot pack, and we're stoked. We're like, this looks great, like this is awesome. We're gonna get some fresh snow, and that really just got us even more amped up, even though we're pretty tired. I mean, we've climbed about 5,000 vertical feet by this point. And so we carry on. I was in front most of the way, setting the booter, and this little like ankle deep wind slab just gets a little deeper and deeper, and pretty soon we're in like, a knee deep booter in Avalanche Bowl or Avalanche Gulch. And yeah, we're still pretty stoked, like we weren't really concerned about the snow stability. I'm not sure we talked about it too much, but we spend a lot of time in the mountains, and I think we're both pretty good about raising concerns when we have them. Yeah, we were both just kind of trudging along up this boot pack, and we're getting pretty close to the top by the time the that kind of midday storm that we were expecting starts shutting down the visibility. Clouds come in with the wind, and we start having just decreased visibility, but still fine. Like we could still see a couple hundred feet at least, and we could see below us. Nothing that we were really too concerned about. We kind of took our last little break at this. It's just kind of one of this small rock boulder that's right at the top of this bowl. There's one of the few areas you can kind of find a flat spot. The slope's probably between 30 and 35 degrees up there, and it's a very long sustained pitch. It goes for thousands of feet. And so we took a break at this rock, which we've since dubbed Skittles Rock, because we ate a pack of Skittles there that really helped fuel us. Yeah, took a little break, and just got ready to punch out the last couple hundred feet of this climb till we're on the summit plateau, and would get some relief from the slope angle. I think that was the last time we really touched base, and from there on, the boot pack got a little steeper, just as we're getting to the kind of the top of this bowl. So I'm punching steps into this slope, close to knee deep, like I did countless times in the in the last year to 5 years. We've done tons of days like that up there. I'm starting to see the red banks off to my right be a little more level with my eye line, which is telling me that I'm real close to the top, even though the visibility was bad enough where I couldn't exactly see where the top of the bowl was. I actually thought that I'd crested the top because the snow got a little shallower, and I noticed I was only maybe shin or ankle deep, and I kind of took a few quick steps thinking I was there, and then it got deeper again and came back up my shin, and I was like, oh, okay, I've still got at least 10 or 20 steps to go. At that point, I take a few more steps, and I remember it was my right foot. I kicked into the slope and heard just the classic whump, and looked up and saw the crown of this avalanche and spiderweb cracks just all around me. And at that point, my memories from actually being caught and swept up in this thing are like super like dreamlike sort of state, where I kind of knew what was happening, but my brain was just really reacting on this very sort of like primeval sort of level, where I had the information of what was going on, but the way I was processing it was just so different from how I normally think, and reminds me way more of what a dream feels like. Yeah, I could just feel myself tumbling and just it felt like being, like swept down a river through a rapid or something. I'm just totally helpless, tumbling through the snow. But I knew that I wasn't far from the crown of the avalanche. I knew that I was pretty close to the top, and that I might have a chance of kind of arresting my fall and being able to climb out the top of the avalanche without being just totally engulfed in it and taken on the full ride, which I also knew was imperative because, one of the embarrassing parts about this story is that we actually didn't bring our beacons and Avi gear that day. We were just really limited on space with the bikes, and we don't really bring Avi gear when we're trying to ski spring conditions. And we had talked about it, and we knew that there was a chance that we could run into some fresh snow, but we just decided that we were going to just make good decisions and not put ourselves in a situation where we were concerned about avalanches. I know that's probably something that we're going to catch flack for and is a pretty questionable call, but not that I'm standing by it. I mean, obviously we should have had our Avi gear that day, but it was a thought through, like, reasoned decision. It wasn't just like carelessly omitting safety gear. Like, we talked about it and decided we basically wouldn't go up into anything that we wouldn't go ski solo, when we weren't going to be able to have a rescue. But as I'm getting swept up in this avalanche, that was at the front of my mind too, was that, like, we don't have our gear. Like, I can't get buried. I can't get caught in this and get buried. So as I'm tumbling, I could feel my crampons kind of making contact with the bed surface underneath this slab that I'm engulfed in. And I remember just thinking, like, I have to get my crampons in. Like, even though you obviously don't typically want to self-arrest with your crampons, like, I knew that was dangerous and that I had a good chance of injuring myself, but I also knew it was my best chance at survival. So as I'm getting tumbled, whenever I could kind of feel them come around and make contact, I would try to grip them. I would try to, like, engage them. And after maybe 5 or 6 rolls, my left crampon really just, like, linked up in the snow, and I could feel it just, like, rip my knee, just bend my knee, hyperflex it kind of backwards and to the side. And it didn't hurt at all, but I knew that I had wrecked my knee. But it also, I could feel it kind of kick me up out of the snow and actually arrest my fall, like, quite a bit. And so after that, I think I rolled maybe a couple more times and everything just slowed down and came to a stop. And, that's when, it wasn't until like my thinking brain kind of kicked back in. I wasn't just in this kind of, like, dreamlike survival mode state that I've been sort of trying to describe. And that's when I realized, I knew my knee was hurt, but I also realized that, Parker was behind me and that he would have had no chance to escape the avalanche, and that I figured that he was probably buried, and that I was not going to be able to rescue. So, but I knew I had to try. So I tried to take a couple steps on my leg, and it just wouldn't support my weight. So I figured I might be able to, if I can't walk, I might still be able to slide on my board. So I took my pack off, took my board. It was A-framed on my pack with skins on. So I took the board off my pack, took the skins off my board, took the crampons off my boots. I had a hard boot set up, so I had to take the bindings out of my pack and put my board together, put the bindings on. Just a standard transition, but it felt like an eternity. And, I can only see maybe 100 feet in any direction, poor visibility. And once I was able to get my board on, the board kind of stabilized my leg enough where I was able to stand up and just kind of heel slip slowly on my board. Fortunately, the debris was like, it was soft slab sort of Avi debris, so it was easily edgeable and smooth enough where I could kind of ride. And I start descending just sort of in a zigzag pattern. I'm screaming Parker's name. And after a few switchbacks down the avalanche debris, I could hear Parker screaming. And they were like awful, like bloody murder screams of agony. But in my mind at that point, it was such a relief because I knew that he had an airway and he was at least alive. So yeah, at that point, I kind of took a deep breath and just like descended down towards the screams and found Parker sitting there in the snow. Actually, he was already in touch with 911. He had dialed 911 and was on the phone with dispatch. I think it took me maybe my estimate's maybe 5 minutes to do the transition and descend down to him. Parker, you wanna pick it up from there, and you can kind of tell what happened up to that point from your perspective.
Well, before you do, Parker, I just have one question. Well, I have a lot of questions, but one question before we switch over to Parker's perspective.
Yeah.
Tanner, I can't imagine what it was like for you to like realize and remember that, Parker's behind you or below you in the boot pack. And when you watch that crown spider and shatter above you, you have a fighting chance because you're pretty high up on the avalanche crown, but he isn't. So he's going to get flushed out. And then when you like have this challenge, this like for what seems like forever doing this transition by putting your board on, just realizing that like you guys have no Abby gear, like what are the odds that he is going to be on the top of the debris? What are the odds that you're going to be able to find him? What are the odds that you're going to be able to dig him out? Like the thought of like, if I was in your position, I just can't imagine how I would feel in that moment. Like, oh my God, am I going to be digging my best friend out of the snow? Or am I even going to find my best friend today? Like that, like when you were describing that a few minutes ago, I was just about to be in tears. That it's so intense.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful feeling. And I've seen avalanches before, and I've had friends get caught right in front of me before. And I think there's nothing that can really prepare you for that. I guess what stood out to me from that moment is it's really not intuitive. Like when you're caught in an avalanche or you're trying to fight for your own survival, everything is pure intuition and pure reaction. And it's not that you don't have access to all the knowledge that like I knew where the crown was. I knew I had a chance of getting out the top, but I wasn't like thinking about that consciously. I was just like reacting to it. But as soon as the avalanche stopped, I knew I was okay and I had to rescue Parker. That intuitiveness is gone, and you have to really like think logically and use your past experience and really try to like just take a deep breath and try to make good decisions, because you're not, if you just react, you're probably going to do something dumb, and if I was just reacting, I mean, my reaction would have been to just get the heck out of there. I mean, I was like, I knew I was going to have to perform a pretty like long self-rescue, and I knew I could probably make it. But yeah, like as soon as it stopped, I did not want to be up there. I knew I had to try to perform a rescue. And the thing that really stood out is like, I remember just thinking like how weird and bizarre it would be going back down to the trailhead, knowing that my best friend is frozen to the side of the mountain. That thought crossed my mind, and it was really, that was the scariest part.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start kind of when the avalanche started, because up until then, I feel like we had pretty much the same experience. Skittles Rock, we go up, Tanner had been breaking trail, so I offered. He said, no, I'm good, I got it. And at the time I was relieved because I was worked. Like I was like, I got to help with the trail breaking, but I was like, so I offered, but when he said he's got it, I was like, oh, man, you're awesome. Thank you. And so, yeah, he was going up and he was making, despite breaking, I mean, it's kind of a beast. Like he was making better time than me following. So he was a ways above me when this happened. He was like, when I first heard the whoop and kind of felt, I looked around and like, he was way, I mean, I could not even see near, I could see that everything had fractured, and I could see that the edge was quite a ways to my left. The bottom was a good amount below me. And I kind of knew that I was in a terrible spot. And as soon as I started to feel the momentum of the avalanche, there was a part of me that tried to take a stance, but immediately feeling the power of it was like, I'm going to be better off surrendering to this than to fight it. Like I could not believe the force that I was feeling just of this thing. It was like, and we had hiked, we were above Skittles Rock. And so when it first happened, I actually almost immediately got a little bit airborne. And what I've realized afterward is that I had gotten swept over Skittles Rock. So we had hiked directly fall line above it when we left it. And that is where I believe my femur snapped. It's pretty blurry. Like I could echo what Tanner said. Like it was kind of like being in a dream. You know, I also had a similar thought of like airway because we, you know, in the beacon thing, like I do, I guess, want to just briefly touch on that. I do realize it's a pretty controversial issue, and I definitely feel like it's kind of embarrassing that we didn't have them. That said, like skiing stratovolcanoes in the summer, like often if you're dealing with like a melt free, and that's what this trip was kind of about, was like skiing stratovolcanoes in June, and we kind of being on the bikes, we were so tight on space, but yeah, like in hindsight, definitely, yeah, because it was fucky. Like it was a fucky day.
The thing I would add to that is that, if we had just showed up in our rigs that day and seen the conditions, like we would have brought our Avi gear,
100%. Yeah. We
would have had our gear, but, being on the bikes, we were pretty intent on doing this self-supported, and, we talked about the risks and we accepted it.
Yeah. And we did. And like, it's the decision we made. And I know this is going to sound even crazier, but I still don't really feel like I'm going to be a beacon no matter what all the time guy. I definitely like am extending my shoulder season here, but like if it's the middle of June and it's a clear melt freeze cycle, I'm pretty comfortable there's just other hazards you're looking for that aren't avalanches, it's just, but anyway, okay. So I went over Skittles Rock and that, my main thought was airway. When I went over the rock, I actually saw, or in the debris as I was kind of spinning around in it, I saw my leg like kind of helicoptering around. It didn't hurt at all at that point. Like I couldn't even feel the injury, but like I immediately thought like, okay, leg's fucked. Like I could see it just whipping around with no support. And at this point, I'm still just trying to keep an airway because I just knew like that was just like I knew that I would not survive if I got buried. Fully buried, wouldn't have made it. So kept going. It was kind of like a dream. Like it felt like it lasted a while, but I'm sure it was probably 10 seconds, 15. I mean, it was, it felt a lot. I mean, there were periods of being where my head was completely under it. And then I'd like come back up and I was just kind of getting tumbled around in it. And again, really kind of feeling like mostly just at the mercy of it. Like I almost felt like I had a better chance of being a rag doll than I did trying to like fight any kind of force within the avalanche. And when I did finally come to a stop, my feet were above me. And I was not buried, but I had just kind of craters of snow around me. And just buried under maybe a few inches on like my legs and stuff. And I was able to kind of push that away and still wasn't really in terrible pain when it first stopped. And I was laying with my head downhill and my leg was kind of cocked out to the side, like a 90-degree angle. And I knew that I needed to spin around. And at this point, I started to scream Tanner's name and I couldn't get any response, which to me was terrifying. I thought maybe he was buried, although I also thought he was so high up. I thought like maybe he didn't even get in it. Like I didn't really know. But I just kind of was just screaming and kind of just had this feeling of like, this might've just like, oh man, it was just a feeling of despair. And I, didn't know if he was okay. Didn't know if I was okay. Didn't know. I mean, it was really just
lonely. Sounds
it was,
lonely.
It really was. Yeah. And it was whiteout conditions, windy, which I'm sure was distorting our calls to each other. It just was very like not welcoming.
Were you bleeding
So I had a pretty deep gash, and it's funny, the gash didn't really hurt at all, even through the whole rescue, but it actually ended up being a pretty serious gash that had to get stitched together. That was just from my boot cutting into my leg. And I was bleeding. And so at the time, though, the blood looked like it was from the femur. It was obvious my femur was broken just looking at my leg, and there was blood pooling in my pant leg. So what we were thinking was open fracture, it was not. It ended up being a closed fracture, but we didn't know that until getting down. So anyway, I picked up my leg with one hand and spun, and that is when the pain fucking just railroaded me, and it hurt so bad, like just ear splitting pain. And I was just like shrieking in pain. I just, I was still screaming Tanner's name intermittently, still not getting a response. I started to I was able to, I was conscious, I got my phone and I called 911, and I called Nick Myers, who's kind of the head climbing ranger on the mountain. And I kind of knew would put the right things into motion. He's kind of like a one-stop shop. It's like calling Nick Myers in my mind was kind of like, he's gonna, kind of send this into the right channel. So,
well, and you have Nick Myers' phone number because I'm guessing because you guide on Shasta, which I learned from this episode.
Yes.
So you must work with him in some capacity. So that's just a number that you have on your phone.
Well, I have, and we've actually Shasta Mountain Guides, and I've aided multiple helicopter rescues. Tanner and I ironically had rescued someone from almost this exact same spot. We were about to ski the Trinity Chutes with a friend of ours, and someone had flagged us down being like, hey, does anybody have any medical training? I was like a ski patroller at the time. So I was, and Tanner's got some training. Nils, we were like, yeah, we have a little bit, not much. And this woman had fallen off the Red Banks, which is it's a nasty fall. And she had blood. She was bleeding from her head. She ended up being fine. But anyway, she was able to get picked up off with a helicopter from that exact spot. So, and to answer your question, yeah, Nick, we've had quite a bit of communication from other rescues and just being, hey, Nick, is the gate open? For sure. He's a pillar in the community up there. So yeah, that's about when I heard Tanner's call back. And that was just like a way, not that the situation wasn't fucked still, but at least I knew he was alive, and I knew that we could I also knew I needed help, I needed help, and I was really hoping he didn't. Cause as I'm lying there, I kind of knew if he was buried, I was not going to be able to move, and get him. And that was just basically just had to leave it up to the mercy of the mountain, which is just a really sinking feeling. But I could not, physically could not really move. And so Tanner came alongside of me, and I could tell right away that he was hurt. He was on his board, but he was not standing well. And we I don't remember the first thing that we said, but I think we both just, and we're very close. And our friendship is very rooted in mountains, but it also extends to our lives. And we, there's no one else I'd rather be on the mountain with. And anyway, just both of us being alive and together was a little moment of okay, this is, a little moment of relief. So at this point, we're sitting there. It's windy, it's blowing snow, it's pretty cold, the visibility is low, and we pretty immediately started getting cold. And as we had a few exchanges with Nick at this time, and he was on it. But we were in a pretty difficult spot to reach, and the primary goal was still a heli rescue. That was the plan. They were coming up with a Bowman bag, which is a bag to help support a rescue where they can lower and pick wench up in this bag. And so they had that, and they had just some basic, gear, but it was a pretty like, that was the goal, was to do a heli rescue. And the helicopter did come a few times and try to, but it was too windy and they didn't have good visibility. And so they would go back, lose a little bit of weight. There were these little breaks you could kind of see. There were little periods where you could see parts of the mountain that you couldn't had normally seen, but then they would immediately get whited back out.
That wasn't until hours later, though. I don't know if you remember that. The first few hours of us being up there was no breaks in the viz. And
okay,
and I remember even us talking early on, like we were both like, they're not going to be able to fly in this, like on the rescue end, the heli showed up real quick, and that was, they were trying to do a heli rescue for sure, but the winds alone would have prevented it, and the fact that the visibility, it was bad. We both knew that a heli rescue was unlikely unless the weather changed, which it didn't. I remember I kind of like the first thing I did was kind of came down below Parker's leg, and I just tried to like, I wanted to try to assess what was going on. I think what you said was my leg's broken real bad. I think it's femur, and I went to just touch your like lower your shin and try to like palpate it to some degree, and like as soon as I even just touched the skin, like you screamed in pain, and I realized like I don't even know how to assess like there's obviously something like way bad, like compound fracture. It's too cold to, take your pants off and like really try to get a look at it. But I could see that Parker's leg was inches shorter on that side, and that where his knee should have been was like about halfway up his quad muscle, and his leg was just the pants on that side of his leg was just full of that contracted muscle and the swelling. And I kind of realized like, oh yeah, that's a broken femur. And it was a bad feeling. I mean, the one, and Parker, you are so strong for this, but like the one consolation was that you were conscious, and like, which is also awful because of the amount of pain that you were in and for how long you had to endure that. But like, that was the one thing that just kind of kept me like in it, was just like, Parker's awake. He's talking to me, like his mental state isn't declining. There's blood in the snow, but like not like bleeding out kind of blood, like bad injury, like amount of blood, but not like losing, liters and liters of blood that are going to like threaten your life. So I knew that you were going to have a really painful descent no matter like what happened. And we tried a few times to rig up something to start lowering Parker, but the slope we're on is still, a good 30 degrees at least. There was just, even just trying to move his leg just a little bit to set it on, a ski or to start lowering was just so excruciating. I was worried about you going into shock and losing consciousness. And we tried, probably a couple hours of trying to figure out something. We realized we're just going to have to wait for more help, because it was tough for me to get around. I mean, I could, if I took a step down, it was like a huge effort to even try and make any progress, like back up to where I was. Even if I just went a couple feet downhill, I could barely support my weight on that leg. So we just tried to get comfortable and waited it out. I couldn't spare any layers. Parker got real cold, but I just like, I had nothing to spare. If I had taken a layer off, I would have been risking hypothermia. And so we just sat there and shivered for hours while the climbing rangers, ascended the mountain. Looking back, I don't see how we were up there for 6 hours before somebody showed up, because like nothing really happened. We didn't even talk that much. But yeah, we were up there for we were up there for a long time. And we finally, saw a little speck moving down below us. And I remember at this point is kind of when Parker's mental state did start to drop a little bit. He had stopped shivering at this point. I was still maintaining. I was, shivering violently, but the shivering was maintaining my temperature. I knew that I wasn't going hypothermic or anything, but at this point Parker started hallucinating a little bit. He thought that the climbing rangers coming up towards us looked like a dog, like running towards us or something. But I also remember that you were still like, you knew you were hallucinating, and you were like, I'm just hallucinating, but they look like a dog running towards me. And I'd ask you questions every once in a while just to make sure that you were conscious and knew who you were and where you lived, and weren't losing it or going into shock. Because I knew I couldn't leave you up there without help coming. And if you had gone into shock or going consciousness, I was prepared to just like try and grab you by the leg and just start dragging you down the mountain. And we spoke about this too, I think earlier on up there. And I remember we were both worried about, a broken femur in your leg could sever an artery, and, you could bleed out pretty fast. But I remember you also saying like, if I lose consciousness, like that's you're going to have to make that decision. And and I think I would have tried to drag you lower if that had been the case. Leaving you up there unconscious would have felt like just leaving you to die. And I don't think I could have done that. At this point, we've been up there for hours and hours. We do have cell service, which is amazing. It's like one of the silver linings of this whole thing, in a way that we got really lucky. And we were able to stay in touch with some of the climbing rangers who were on their way up. Another thing that was really lucky is the Shasta mountain guides, who Parker guides for, was actually doing a guide training in Lower Avalanche Gulch that day. So there was a ton of guides, and they kind of heard what was going on, and they were also instrumental in the rescue, and mobilized a ton of mountain guides to who have all sorts of great climbing and medical experience to assist us. But the first people that reached us were the climbing rangers, the Mount Shasta climbing rangers, who are super awesome, really great, really great guys, and awesome athletes. When the first climbing ranger got up there, Corey, I kind of touched base with him, and he kind of took over and started talking to Parker. And I told him, like, look, I can descend on my own. Like, I got to go. I got to get out of here because I'm really cold, and I got to get out of here before the, there was, I wanted to go down. I was, as screwed up as everything was, I was definitely ready to get off the mountain. Yeah. So I started descending on my screwed up leg, and was actually able to make it all the way back to the parking lot, with some clever navigating. Yeah. At that point, I knew Parker was in good hands, but I also knew that there was a real chance that he could have hypothermia. There's a real chance he could have frostbite, that he could, that he could lose his leg. It was a relief to be off the mountain and know that he was alive, but I also just knew that he wasn't out of the woods, and that it was going to be really brutal coming off that mountain, however it happened.
Yeah. Once the Rangers got up there, I was, and before that too, even when they were getting up the hill, there was kind of this moment where in my mind, I was like, Tanner, like, you could probably go down, because it's like, and they looked like people at this point. They were closer. They were at the, kind of coming over Helen Lake. And Tanner stuck with me, and I didn't realize how much it meant at the time, but it means a lot. They did that because it was the cold. It was a pretty real threat at that point. Like we had been, I would say both of us were at risk of a cold injury for sure at that point. After they got up there, they had a Bowman bag, which is, again, at this point, it's obvious to everybody that this is not a heli rescue. This is a ground rescue. And they had a Bowman bag, which is not fully rigid. It has a rough frame, but it's not really meant to be used as a sled. But that's kind of what we ended up, that's what the plan was, with the tools available and and so they kind of, everybody, there was at this point, because there was also a friend of ours, David, come up, and there was at this point 3 people, and we were able to kind of lift me into this Bowman bag, which was just excruciating pain. And every time anything like this happened, I would let out like a primal scream that I was like not aware was inside of me. Like it wasn't like it's just like this other force came out, and it was just insane, like the energy coming out of me. And like there ended up being quite a few of those, but that first transition was rough. And then God, so going down that, so this is not a rigid bottom on this sled, and my femur we didn't really have a good way to support it. And like, maybe we could have, like, it just, time was the way we were looking at it. And I think that they were on it with this is like, in the climbing rangers, it was like, time is more important than a little bit of comfort. Like we need to go.
Yeah, you've been up there for 6 hours already. And so it's like, yeah, we could spend the time to like splint your one leg to the other leg. But really what's more important right now, if you stopped shivering, which is what Tanner said that you had done, I don't know how many minutes or hours prior to the arrival of the rescue team, but once you stop shivering, you've already passed the threshold of being mildly hypothermic to severely hypothermic. That's a very, very dangerous place to be. And so I'm just an EMT, but I 100% would stand behind their decision by prioritizing your descent versus splinting your legs together, for sure.
100%. And I agree with you on that as well. I think it was times of the essence. There was quite a bit of blood at this point, and everyone just kind of had to assume it was an open fracture. Again, ended up not being, but that's just kind of what it looked like. So yeah, time, like you're saying, and so every bump without traction on that femur, and it's cratered because it's the main route up the mountain. So there's a lot, and there was just a lot of natural texture. It was excruciating. And this is when I started to kind of feel like I might pass out. Dave, who's a friend that was skiing with us, he was really good about keeping me engaged because everyone was really just focused on the logistics. It was pretty hard to like get me moving down with just what the tools that we had. And again, I just don't really know how to describe the pain, but it was bad. we kept going, and eventually we got kind of down where we're getting into below Helen Lake, which is, I'd say, kind of a benchmark of the mountain. Like once you're going down, you're in like the main gully up. And we had some other help coming up. Like Tanner had mentioned, Shasta Mountain Guides were out there doing a training, and there was mainly the people that were running it which were close friends, were kind of booking up and really doing everything they could to help. They had little stations with like hot water, and they were taking turns helping kind of get me through the snow. And then at a point, we were able to switch to a rigid, like a ski patrol style toboggan. And my friend Katie and JC, both are expert patrollers. They kind of got me down from there. And that was like, having that rigid bottom was just, it still hurt like really bad, but that was a big upgrade, to have that. And
I was saying, yeah, they had taken that rigid sled up into past the wilderness boundary on a snowmobile because they knew it was so urgent that they, I guess had approval to kind of fudge the rules a little bit. But I know that was a big thing.
Yeah, it's somewhat out of characteristic. Like they are surprisingly stringent about those wilderness boundaries. Like even in a rescue situation. Yeah, for better or for worse, but they typically don't. Like Tanner was saying, they don't typically bring them up there. And so around the 50-50 moraine is where we switched to that. And we were actually able to move a lot faster at that point too. Because at this point, this whole sled down took another 6 hours. So the whole thing was 12 hours from the incident. And so it was just long. And I was kind of in and out. I'd go through this cycle of like ear splitting pain and then getting really kind of like a little dizzy. And then, Dave kept going, and he kept like, God, one thing that just kept me awake was just thinking about my son And that was something that like throughout this whole thing was just especially as I was just going down, I would just kind of like, it's like I came pretty close to leaving him without a dad. And like, that is just, I don't know, it really fucked me up for sure. The emotion from that has been really staying with me. I'm trying to kind of work through it. We're like we're reading Harry Potter right now, and I was reading him Harry Potter, and I just like, we're reading about Harry's parents dying, and I just start bawling reading Harry Potter. It's like, oh man, like I really got to work through some shit if Harry Potter is going to set me off. But anyway, little sidetrack there. Anyway, we kept going down, and eventually we got pretty close to the parking lot, which is actually a really challenging spot because it's a little flatter, and there had to just getting the sled through that for everyone helping, which was a whole crew of people at this point. Getting down, there was a pretty large group of people assembled down there at that point. A lot of search and rescue volunteers that assembled in the parking lot. The sheriff was out there, and everyone that had helped with the rescue obviously was down there. So there was a pretty big scene around the ambulance. And at this point, the sheriff kind of took over the scene, which, I think it was kind of just like a protocol thing that they were doing, but kind of mucked it up a little bit. Like it was just, I got switched onto a different backboard that I didn't need. Like, and then he started cutting off like and I'm like, really, the cold is a big issue at this point. Like it's almost as bad. Like to me, in my mind, the cold's worse than the femur with where we're at in time, with how long I had been, just like my toes were numb, everything. And like, started basically taking off all my clothing in the parking lot, and like outside of the warm ambulance. And I was kind of like, the whole thing was just a little, and I had debriefed with other rescuers. It was not the greatest. And again, not trying to follow, it was people trying to follow protocols in a situation that they weren't really, I think, ready for. I don't know. But, and there was just, when you have that large of a crowd of people, I feel like there's just some human dynamics that come out. And it was a little weird. But anyway, getting into the ambulance, I immediately was given some fentanyl. And from then on, pretty serious dose of like dilaudid fentanyl and morphine. And I was like, that was the end of the excruciating pain for, aside from post-surgery recovery, all that. But yeah, that was a point of like, okay. And, this whole time I had thought, it seemed like the fracture was open. I thought there was a pretty good chance at that point, with it being so long, that I might lose my leg. And that was like, I kind of, when I realized it was a closed fracture, which was getting into the ambulance, I realized like, okay, I might be able to keep my leg. And ironically, our friend that we had just skied with 3 days prior on Shasta is a one-legged skier and climber who's done like Denali and a ton of stuff. And anyway, at the time, I kind of had come to terms with, if I lose my leg, like I'm going to still ski. Just knowing Pete and being close friends and seeing what he's done with one leg, it's like, okay, like it wasn't even, I had kind of come to terms with the fact that I might lose it,
So Tanner, what were your injuries? And then we'll bounce over to Parker and learn about Parker's injuries, and then we'll wrap it up with lessons learned. So Tanner, what were your injuries at the end of it all?
I AMA'd against medical advice. Like I had my sister who lives in Shasta come pick me up, and there's an ambulance at the lot, but I didn't go with them. I knew I had blown my knee, but I've had knee injuries before, and so I just went to a clinic a couple days later and ended up kind of taking the long route. Got MRIs. The MRI showed that my PCL was fully severed. Eventually, I was able to get into a sports ortho just recently who examined my leg and found that my MCL was also shot. I guess it's pretty much impossible to completely rupture your PCL without tearing your MCL or something else too. So After being told by a bunch of doctors that you don't need your PCL and that, you're going to be fine and heal on your own, getting into this sports ortho last month, he was confident that I was going to do a lot better with surgery. So just a couple weeks ago, I had my PCL and my MCL reconstructed with cadaver tendons, and I'm right in the thick of that healing process. But my outlook's really good. It's going to be 9 months before I can do more than you push it back, to where I'm snowboarding again and doing the stuff I want to do. But long-term outlook looks really good.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I empathize with you because I had my third knee surgery at the end of May. So, yeah, it's been a long road, but I hope that you heal up. And Parker, what were your injuries?
So my femur on my left side, like clean snapped, and it actually in a way broke fairly well. I mean, it snapped, and then it kind of did the classic femur thing where it like crosses itself and kind of contracts with your muscle. So I ended up they straightened it and then drilled out both bones, and then put a rod up through the middle of the femur. And then put screws on either end. So it basically goes from my knee all the way up to my hip. And then there's 2 sets of screws on either end of it. And recovery has been really hard, to be honest. And I also did some sort of frost damage on my feet, more on the left foot, which was the injury side, but some on the right. And I don't really know. I'm gonna have to I can't really fully suss it out until I'm in the mountains with them. It's like sometimes it's like I can't get them warm even though it's cold. It's something is damaged there, and it's not. I didn't get frostbite. I didn't lose any toes or anything, but I had some sort of cold injury in my feet. And then honestly, the thing that I kind of hadn't been prepared for is like the emotional damage that it's kind of caused. Like I definitely have been. It's kind of put my whole life in a spin. I work with my body. I work in a shop, and it's been really hard just to keep that even around. I mean, actually, Tanner helped tremendously because kind of had like a partial recovery before his surgery and was able to like help a little. But I did just get off of crutches. I'm on a cane now, and I'm kind of working into doing trekking poles and like. You can't complain too bad there. I do think it's going to eventually. My bone has been slow to grow in between the break.
When was your surgery?
So it was right after the incident. They actually did it that night.
So
it was April 28th, I think, right? Does that sound right?
We climbed on April 27th, so the surgery might have been the 28th.
Okay.
Wind slabs are just tricky. And we live in this really great maritime climate, and we're blessed with a really stable snowpack 95% of the time. We get up close and personal with avalanches. Like I try to do around 100 days in the backcountry every year, and it's I'm really familiar with the snowpack, and it feels really comfortable. And we don't have these deep persistent slab problems that you see in colder climates, colder, drier climates. The avalanche hazard is pretty manageable. And like I said, we get up close and personal with it. I usually trigger a few like D1 little micro slabs every year. The older I've gotten and the more experienced I've gotten more comfortable with the risk, and I've started taking more risks, if anything, which is I kind of feel like the natural progression. If you're trying to be safe, you learn more. And, on days in the past when you maybe would have stayed away from the mountain entirely, you feel like you understand the risk and can kind of step out. And we had a few days this last winter where we got into really steep, pretty gnarly terrain. There were wind slab problems, and, I felt like we managed them, reasonably. Not that we didn't take any risks, but I'm just not prepared to be the kind of snowboarder who goes out there and never takes any risks. And, we clearly made some bad decisions that day. And, but we were definitely both comfortable with the risk. But that doesn't mean something bad isn't going to happen. It was a sneaky, it was just a sneaky, unstable late season storm. Like the Abbey Center had already closed down. They weren't doing daily forecasts, and we really weren't prepared for just how that wind slab had gotten kind of settled in there. And actually, a couple of days after our incident, somebody triggered an avalanche and got injured in Avalanche Gulch, just down the ridge a little bit on the same aspect. It's hard to say like this is exactly where we went wrong. Like I guess the one thing, we're kind of used to getting at least 2 red flags when we see avalanche activity out here. Cracking and more than 12 inches of snow overnight, or like you usually get multiple signs. That day we really just had the one sign, and it was wind loading, but that's enough. If you take risks, the bad things can happen. I mean, it's kind of part of the game. I guess the thing I'd take away from that is, if we hadn't been so set on our schedule, and I guess this is kind of the human factor that plays in. If we were just trying to go ski some good conditions, we would have gone up the next day when the weather was clear, wouldn't have been as windy. We had better viz. We would have been able to see what was going on. Maybe we would have gone in and triggered the same avalanche, but would have been above it and been on our boards, which would have been a better scenario. We probably wouldn't have gotten hurt that way. Yeah, I mean, just hiking into a storm, going into a whiteout in big terrain like that it's not ideal. And I've done it before, and it worked out fine. I'll probably do it again, if I'm honest. It's hard to say, because I don't want to stop taking risks. It's kind of hard to draw a clear lesson from just getting caught in a sneaky late season wind slab. But I guess really just the human factor of us being on a timeline and really feeling like we needed to get it done that day.
Well, I would echo, I'd say the biggest thing is just that we were on our timeline. And I think the reason I think that's the biggest thing is when I'm looking at the day, I think that's the one thing where, like, if we weren't on this trip and weren't on this timeline, we probably would have, like, it would have been a bike day. We would have gone mountain biking. We would have done something else and maybe skied, like Tanner was saying, the next day. Or, it just wasn't a day that screamed, go ski at 14,000 feet. And so I think the timeline for me is the thing that is probably the biggest. And honestly, this trip we were on had risks in my mind that were much, like, I was more worried about our road biking, like, soft shoulders in Washington, getting hit on a bike or something like that. Like, we were already accepting many risks to do this trip, and being a summer ski trip, avalanches weren't like the top. I mean, it wasn't something that we completely wrote off, but it was like, we had a lot of other things on our mind as far as risk management. I feel like one of the things that kind of went, I mean, the community of people, in a way, when I think about this whole incident, is what, like, saved us. And what, I mean, the Shasta really does have a very special community. And I'm not saying other mountains don't, but there really is just like a wonderful, I mean, and it's kind of centered around Shasta mountain guides, the climbing rangers, just the people that go up there relentlessly. But the community, like, really came together for us. And that, like, and I would say, just as far as lessons for anyone, like, have a good idea of who you're going to call. I mean, the one thing I called Nick, and that was, I'm really glad I did, but I should have called Chris Carr. He's the owner of Shasta Mountain Guides. They were up there that day, and it took them quite a while. Chris had come and visit me in the hospital, and I talked with them, and they didn't actually find out about it for quite a while. And so I think in hindsight, it's almost like, not saying don't make the 911 call, but then jumping in and, like, who can I call in the community? I mean, there's so much red tape for something like SAR or someone to mobilize a group, but, like, a person can just hop in their car and go and probably get up there. We probably could have gotten layers up to ourselves 2 hours earlier if we would have called some friends in the community, which is kind of hard to think about in an emergency, but it's like, yeah, like, sometimes the people that are going to be able to help the most, it might not be the search and rescue department, it might be someone just, yeah. Anyway, that was just another takeaway just from it all.
Thank you so much to Tanner and Parker for sharing your story. And thank you for listening to my podcast. Thank you to Rocky Talkie, Zolio, and Amazfit for sponsoring this episode. And please remember that there are only 17 more Sharp End totes built by Equipped left for sale. 20% of these proceeds are kicked back to my podcast. There is a really cool topo map of the Chugach Range, which are the mountains that overlook Anchorage, Alaska, on the tote bag. So make sure to get yours before they sell out. Don't forget to check out the new videos up on the Sharp End Podcast YouTube channel. And if you want more content, head on over to Patreon to sign up. There are so many bonus episodes that you can learn from exclusive to Patreon supporters. And as always, remember, play hard and be smart.